Bill Russell once looked a man in the eye and said he's the biggest racist. But that was just the beginning. The greatest winner in NBA history carried hatreds so deep they shaped dynasties and destroyed friendships. These weren't just rivalries, they were calculated weapons in a war against a system that wanted him silent and grateful. Russell refused both. He built his championships on hostility, and the 10 men he despised most reveal exactly how he did it. To understand Russell's hate, you need to understand his world. When he entered the NBA in 1956, the league had an unwritten quota system, only 2 or 3 black players per team. Russell arrived in Boston, a city he called a flea market of racism. Vandals broke into his home and defecated in his bed. They spray-painted racial slurs on his walls. White fans cheered when he scored, but crossed the street when they saw him walking. So Russell made a choice. He would not smile. He would not sign autographs. He would not pretend to be grateful. Instead, he became what he called a sentinel, a watcher, a man who guarded his own humanity by refusing to perform for people who saw him as entertainment, not as human. And that required enemies. Russell understood that in a world built on white supremacy, every relationship was political. His teammates benefited from privilege while staying silent. His rivals were held up as great white hopes meant to restore the racial order. His black peers were criticized for not matching his militancy. Russell weaponized his contempt against all of them. He used hate as a tool to win, to resist, and to survive. And the 10 men he targeted most reveal the architecture of that hate. Start with Jerry West, the shy perfectionist from West Virginia. The media called him the Great White Hope. They needed someone to beat the black-dominated Celtics, and West was their chosen savior. The narrative was everywhere. Sports writers penned endless columns about West's grace, his work ethic, his all-American values. They contrasted him with Russell's cold demeanor and refusal to play the game off the court. West became a symbol, whether he wanted to be or not. And Russell made sure West felt every ounce of that symbolic weight. Russell knew this. During an All-Star game, Russell walked up to West, cackled, and said it out loud. "Surely you realize, Jerry, that you are the Great White Hope." It wasn't friendly banter, it was psychological warfare. By naming the burden, Russell isolated West. He forced West to carry the weight of white America's expectations on his shoulders alone. And Russell used that weight to crush him. Year after year, West came close. Year after year, Russell destroyed him. The 1969 Finals was the peak. The Lakers acquired Wilt Chamberlain to pair with West and Elgin Baylor. They were heavy favorites. Lakers owner Jack Kent Cooke was so confident he ordered thousands of balloons suspended in the Forum rafters. He printed leaflets detailing the Lakers' victory ceremony before Game 7 even started. When Russell found one of those leaflets, his reaction was cold fury. He used it to stoke hatred in his team. He framed the Lakers' arrogance as disrespect to competition itself. Then, he went out and beat them. Russell scored 6 points in Game 7. West scored 42, but Russell grabbed 21 rebounds, controlled the paint, and won the game. After it ended, Russell refused to console West. He believed showing pity would insult the vanquished. Russell hated the system that elevated West despite his repeated failures. He hated that West was called a tragic hero, while Russell was called an arrogant winner. And he took immense pleasure in dismantling the white hope narrative every single time. Then there was Tom Gola. If West earned Russell's torment, Gola earned his disdain. Gola was hailed as the perfect basketball player in the mid-50s, a 6'6" white forward who could handle the ball, rebound, and defend. The media described him with words like effortless, graceful, and intelligent. They described Russell with words about his physical attributes. Russell noticed the coding immediately. He saw Gola as the establishment's darling, a player whose reputation was inflated by his race. Before the 1955 NCAA championship game, Russell and his teammate Ross Judish crossed paths with Gola in a hotel lobby. Russell decided to shatter Gola's confidence right there. He loudly proclaimed, "Well, we're honored. Here comes Mr. Gola." The sarcasm dripped from every word. It was a rejection of the hierarchy that placed Gola above Russell. That disdain carried into the NBA. Russell hated Gola's nice guy persona. Gola listened to his coach, loved his mother, and acted nice to school children. Russell viewed it as a performance of conformity, and he refused to participate. He made it a point to destroy Gola's teams. Every matchup was a referendum on media bias. Gola was the safe white athlete America wanted Russell to be. Russell punished him for it. Before we go further, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Do you think Russell was right to use the Great White Hope label as a weapon against West? Let me know below. Now, let's talk about the locker room wars. Russell's own teammates. Start with Bob Cousy. When Russell arrived in 1956, Cousy was the Houdini of the hardwood, the undisputed king of Boston sports, a white man living comfortably in a segregated city. For the first several years of the dynasty, Russell and Cousy barely spoke off the court. This wasn't a personality clash. It was a racial chasm. While Russell was denied service in restaurants and endured racial abuse, Cousy stayed silent. He didn't use his immense social capital to speak out. Russell viewed Cousy as a mercenary, a player happy to benefit from Russell's rebounding and defense, which launched the fast breaks Cousy became famous for, but unwilling to stand in the line of fire for his teammates' humanity. The depth of this alienation became clear decades later. Cousy wrote a letter to Russell called The Last Pass. In it, he apologized for his silence. He admitted to being an entertainer who was accepted as a human being while Russell was viewed only as a performer. He expressed deep guilt for not doing more. When Cousy asked if Russell received the letter, Russell simply replied, "Yes, I did. Thank you." Nothing more. He could forgive, perhaps, but he would never forget the isolation he felt when he was the only black sentinel in the Celtics locker room. Tommy Heinsohn represented a different challenge. If Cousy was the distant captain, Heinsohn was the abrasive, selfish peer. Heinsohn was a volume shooter, a gunner who believed his scoring was as valuable as Russell's defense. The friction was immediate. Russell smiled with relish at the challenge of guarding Heinsohn in practice, but he resented how the media built up Heinsohn while knocking Russell down. Heinsohn got credit for points. Russell got barely mentioned for the defensive stops and rebounds that made those points possible. The Boston press loved Heinsohn's swagger. They called Russell difficult. Russell was the ultimate team player, sacrificing his body and stats for wins. Heinsohn obsessed over his own numbers. After wins, Heinsohn would growl, "I didn't get my 30, did I?" To Russell, this mindset was repulsive. It betrayed the purity of the game. Russell used his aloofness as a weapon. He froze Heinsohn out of plays. He delivered withering critiques in the locker room. Heinsohn later admitted that Russell consciously constructed armor to protect himself. But at the time, the animosity was real. They fought over credit, over media affection, over the soul of the team. While they eventually forged mutual respect based on winning, Russell always viewed Heinsohn's selfishness as a defect to be managed, not celebrated. Larry Siegfried came later, a gritty guard who joined the Celtics in the mid-60s. He became a focal point of Russell's ire during Russell's tenure as player-coach. Siegfried was a favorite of white working-class Boston fans, the same fans who racially abused Russell. Russell's dislike for Siegfried was symbolic. He saw in Siegfried the type of player Boston wanted to love. White, hardworking, limited in talent, but high in effort. Russell resented that Siegfried received warmth from the Garden crowd that Russell never did. As a coach, Russell was notoriously hard on Siegfried. He was direct and precise, often bordering on cold. He used Siegfried as a tool, a screen setter and floor spacer, but never embraced him. Even when Siegfried was instrumental in the 1969 finals, setting screens that freed Sam Jones for the buzzer beater, Russell gave him little public credit. The hate here was a projection of Russell's war with the Boston fan base. Siegfried was collateral damage, the white avatar of a city Russell despised. Now the ideological foes. Start with Wilt Chamberlain, the defining dichotomy of NBA history. What began as friendship devolved into deep, acrimonious hatred. These were two black superstars who should have been allies in the fight against racism. Instead, they became bitter enemies. The contrast between them was stark. Russell was the collective sacrifice personified. Wilt was individual dominance incarnate. Russell's disdain for Wilt was intellectual. In his memoir, Second Wind, Russell wrote a scathing critique of Chamberlain's character. He argued that Wilt was ambivalent about winning. Russell believed Wilt changed his style of play, from scorer to passer to defender, not to win, but to chase individual accolades and satisfy his ego. To Russell, whose entire existence was predicated on the singular goal of championships, this was a cardinal sin. The hatred solidified after Game 7 of the 1969 finals. Chamberlain, complaining of a knee injury, took himself out of the game in the final minutes. The Celtics held on to win. Russell was merciless. He publicly declared that any injury short of a broken leg or a broken back is not enough to leave a Game 7. This accusation that Wilt had quit destroyed their relationship for over 2 decades. Russell viewed Wilt's exit as ultimate proof. When the pressure was absolute, Wilt sought a way out. Russell hated Wilt because Wilt had all the tools to be the greatest, but lacked the heart. Russell also despised Wilt's politics. Wilt supported Nixon. Wilt was a Republican. To Russell, the radical activist, Wilt was a sellout. Russell's playoff record in Game 7s was 10-0. Wilt faded in those moments. To Russell, Wilt was soft, selfish, and ultimately a choker. Elgin Baylor faced similar contempt. Russell respected Baylor's ability, but despised the narrative of the beautiful loser. Russell classified Baylor alongside Wilt as a player trapped in self-righteous self-marketing. Baylor was the precursor to the modern highlight reel player. He could do things on the court that seemed to defy physics. Spectacular dunks, acrobatic layups, moves that made crowds gasp. But Russell saw through the spectacle to the scoreboard. Russell critiqued his style as plantation basketball, entertaining for white folks, but ultimately ineffective for winning championships. Russell pointed to Baylor's 61-point performance in Game 5 of the 1962 Finals. Baylor set a finals record. The Celtics won the series. To Russell, scoring 61 points in a loss wasn't an achievement. It was a failure of strategy. He hated how the media fawned over Baylor's stats while ignoring the final score. Russell viewed Baylor's tragic career, retiring just months before the Lakers finally won a title in 1972, as a morality play, confirming the superiority of Celtic basketball. Then came the faces of overt racism. Clyde Lovellette. If Russell's hatred for Wilt was philosophical, his hatred for Lovellette was visceral. Lovellette was widely identified by peers as possibly the most racist star.
Player of the era. He played for the St. Louis Hawks, a team Russell considered the most racist in the league. The Hawks were the team of the South. Lovellette was their enforcer. He was known for dirty play, elbows to the head, undercutting players in the air, using racial slurs to intimidate black opponents. Russell, who promised his grandfather he would never allow a white man to mistreat him, fought Lovellette with terrifying intensity. Their matchups were physical wars. Russell hated Lovellette as a physical manifestation of the Jim Crow violence he had escaped in Louisiana. The irony is that Lovellette ended his career as a benchwarmer for the Celtics, winning 2 titles in 1963 and 1964 on Russell's back. Russell tolerated his presence only because Lovellette could shoot and spell Russell for a few minutes. But the hate never went away. Russell viewed Lovellette's rings as theft, a racist relic carried to glory by the very black excellence he had tried to physically destroy. Frank Ramsey represented a more insidious form of racism, the polite Southern gentleman hierarchy. A star at the University of Kentucky under Adolph Rupp, a coach notorious for his reluctance to integrate, Ramsey brought the social codes of the segregated South into the NBA. Where Lovellette's racism was violent and obvious, Ramsey's was quiet and systemic. It was the racism of politeness, of knowing your place, of tradition. Russell found this almost more dangerous because it pretended to be civilized. The friction came to a head in 1961. The Celtics were scheduled to play an exhibition game in Lexington, Kentucky, Ramsey's hometown. When Russell, Sam Jones, and Satch Sanders were refused service at a local coffee shop due to their race, Russell organized an immediate boycott. He refused to play. Ramsey, the local hero, did not join the boycott. He played. Russell hated this silence. He viewed Ramsey's comfort in the segregated spaces of Kentucky as a betrayal. While Ramsey was a nice guy and a great sixth man, he represented the white moderate who preferred order to justice. Russell respected Ramsey's game, but held deep contempt for the Southern white culture Ramsey embodied, a culture that smiled in your face while denying you a seat at the table. Finally, Red Auerbach. Russell's relationship with his coach was a dense tangle of love and hate. Auerbach was the man who traded for him and built the dynasty, but he was also the dictator who controlled Russell's economic destiny. This was complicated territory. Auerbach gave Russell opportunities no other coach would have. He made Russell the first black head coach in NBA history. Yet Russell still chafed under his authority. Russell hated the paternalism of the player-coach relationship. He fought Auerbach tooth and nail for every contract. In 1965, after Wilt Chamberlain signed a contract for $100,000, Russell demanded $100,001. It wasn't about the money. It was about the hierarchy. Russell refused to be second to anyone. He refused to let Auerbach treat him as a discount asset. Russell explicitly stated in Second Wind that he did not want to be a symbol or a creation of Auerbach. He separated the man from the institution. While they shared Celtic's pride, Russell kept Auerbach at arm's length to maintain his own agency. He resented the narrative that Auerbach made him. In Russell's eyes, he made Auerbach. The hate was the friction of two alphas, a necessary fire that kept the dynasty burning, but left scars on both men. Russell's hatreds weren't flaws. They were the structural beams of his greatness. In a world that demanded black subservience, Russell weaponized his animosities to create a fortress of dignity. He hated West Angola to deconstruct the myth of white superiority. He hated Cousy and Heinsohn to force his teammates to acknowledge his humanity and primacy. He hated Chamberlain and Baylor to define the moral supremacy of collective basketball over individual glory. He hated Lovelet and Ramsey to physically and politically resist the violence of segregation. He hated Auerbach to ensure he remained a free man, not a piece of property. Russell once said he decided in college to win. Then, it's a historical fact, and nobody can take it away from me. His hate was the fuel for that historical fact. A burning refusal to be anything less than the greatest winner in the history of American sports. So here's my question for you. Was Russell's hate justified? Was it necessary? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into the stories that shaped basketball history, make sure you're subscribed. Russell didn't just win championships. He won on his own terms. He controlled the narrative. He forced the world to reckon with his humanity. And in the end, that's what made him not just the greatest winner, but the most important athlete of his generation. His hate wasn't weakness, it was power. And that power changed everything.